What are the benefits of painting upside down? Well, I'm going to paint practically this whole painting upside down and discuss why it can help you improve your watercolours and increase your confidence in your painting. So, shall we get started? So I'm going to paint the sky first. So I've mixed up some colours for the sky. I've got some Naples yellow, a big puddle of that, some Cobalt teal, but you can use Cerulean. And I've also got ultramarine mixed with deep scarlet, but you could use cadmium red mixed with ultramarine, so you get sort of grey violet colour. I've also mixed a very diluted version of that as well. I'm using a wax crown. You can use wax, a candle wax, and it's just to use it as a resist. I'm actually sort of pressing quite hard on the shoreline, and this is just to protect that area so it remains white. Do leave us some gaps in between that, not one solid line. So I'm just adding a little bit more there around the edge of the sand, just here and there. I'm not using any masking fluid. So I'm using a spritzer bottle and I'm going to spritz the sky here and there. I'm avoiding the horizon area. It's just mainly the sort of middle and top of the sky, using my brush to wet the horizon area. You notice I'm also wetting the watercolour pencil just to blend that a little bit. And I'm starting off with the Naples yellow with my size 10 brush, painting wet into wet. I'm going to paint pretty much this whole painting upside down. So it's going to be fun. So I'm looking at the photograph and I'm seeing that shape. And the benefits here is it really does get rid of all the information. I'm just focusing on that yellow and where it is in the sky. When I'm painting the right way up, sometimes the rest of the painting and the details take over and I'm looking at everything. Here it focuses my mind more. I'm spritzing this yellow and tilting at the same time to get it to move, and it creates some lovely soft edges and random effects. And I'm sort of channeling my Nita Engel as well here, an artist that I've been looking at recently because she sort of experimented with her watercolours. Sadly, she passed away in 2019. I just love her work and I definitely recommend checking her out. And I'll put a link for a video that she did on YouTube in the description below. So I'm adding the Cobalt teal here with my size 4 round brush, painting wet into wet, just above the horizon, blending that there. Taking my time. I'm just tilting that now, upside down tilting, just towards the Naples yellow, and just teasing it with a clean damp brush just here and there. I'm adding now the ultramarine with the deep scarlet. Again, you could use ultramarine and any red. I'm tilting to the right, letting it all run down, blending into that teal, and just tilting forwards and leaving that flat there. This is a very dilute ultramarine with the deep scarlet, and this is painting wet into wet with my size 10 brush. Tilting upwards and downwards and this way and that way, adding a little bit more of that dilute ultramarine with the deep scarlet, and just tilting. Don't panic when you see it like that. Just trust the process. It'll all sort of blend nicely. I'm just lifting off here a little bit with my paper towel where it ran into the heels. And I'm just tilting again. Just take your time. Just adding a little bit more of that dilute ultramarine and deep scarlet into the middle of the sky area around those cliff tops. Mixing up some more ultramarine here with a little bit of that Cobalt teal. And just painting it at the top of the sky area here and there. Trying not to touch the Naples yellow. You can use yellow ochre or raw sienna as a substitute. And just taking off the excess paint at the edge of the painting there with a clean damp brush. So I'm going to start adding the sort of slightly thicker, darker colour here. That's the ultramarine, still with that deep scarlet, painting this wet into wet. So the more water you add to a wash, the lighter it is. So this is slightly more paint in this one. And I'm just tilting to the right here, letting it all flow down, tilting upside down to the side, adding a little bit more dark at the top there, touch more to the middle of the sky and near the horizon, still painting wet into wet. You'll know that the paper is wet because you can see a really nice shine. So I'm tilting here to the right, Adding a little bit more paint, just seeing what happens, experimenting, being open for changes and happy accidents. So I'm just using a clean damp brush, as you saw there, just to soften the edge where the cliff is. So when you paint the cliffs later, you haven't got two hard edges bumping against one another, creating more depth. The cliffs look like they're in front of the sky. So I'm mixing up here some ultramarine with a little bit more of that deep scarlet. And this is slightly creamier, and I'm painting damp into damp. So the surface has still got a shine on there, but it's not as wet, and the paint isn't as wet. I'm just adding some darker clouds there using my size 10 round brush. So I am looking at the photograph and I'm just trying to give the impression of those sort of darker clouds in front of the lighter clouds here and there. So I'm tilting here actually just to get that paint moving a little bit. So I'm using the spritzer bottle just to gently re-wet it, not too much. And I'm tilting just to the right here, just to get the paint moving. And I must say, working upside down, it really does concentrate my mind. I'm really looking at the shapes of these clouds here. I've decided to get rid of that little white patch there to the right. It was kind of distracting me. I was leaving it there as long as possible and decided it didn't work. So I'm just spritzing away then. I love the light in the sky there between those two dark clouds, just adding a little bit more of the ultramarine with the deep scarlet. Remember, you can use cadmium red or Windsor red, and I'm just taking off the puddle on the edge of the tape there, not off the paper, and I'm going to allow the sky to dry naturally. So the sky has dried, and what I'm going to do now is paint the sea. Wet on dry. So I've started off with a very dilute Naples yellow. Remember, you can use raw sienna or yellow ochre. And I'm painting this in the lightest area of the sea. And now I'm using that cobalt teal, you can use cerulean, and I'm painting next to it on the left and pushing it into that Naples yellow, but not quite mixing it. Mixing up some cobalt blue here, you can use ultramarine. And I'm painting this wet into wet, just on top of that cobalt teal, leaving a few little gaps here and there, using the belly of my brush as well to create a dry brush effect. Using the tip of the brush now just to paint some paler blues there, just in that sort of yellow area, the light area of the sea. I really want to keep as much light as possible. Using the ultramarine now with that deep scarlet colour, painting damp into damp over the blue and on the sort of shore edge there, and a little bit on the horizon. Adding a little bit more of that ultramarine mixed with the scarlet on the horizon, painting damp into damp, and along the shoreline using the tip of my brush to add the detail there. And I'm using that size 10 clean damp brush just to blend that sort of grey blue colour there along the shoreline. I'm just adding a little bit more dark just at the bottom of the sea area there, damp into damp using the ultramarine and scarlet. Just blending there and adding a little bit more dark just in this area here. It's a little bit tricky to see what's going on here upside down. I think if I had it the right way up, my imagination would have made up for the information. Because I'm looking at upside down, I kind of have to just paint what I see. And that's a really good thing, because sometimes we can get a little bit carried away when we're painting the right way up. What I'm doing now is I'm going to paint the sandy beach. I'm starting off with the Naples yellow mixed with the ultramarine and the scarlet, just to muddy it up a little bit. So it's about 80% Naples yellow and about 20% of the ultramarine mix. I'm now adding a little bit more of that ultramarine and scarlet, and I'm painting in the middle of the sandy beach. It's lighter on the edges of it, and that's wet into wet with my size 10 brush. And now I'm using a slightly darker mix here, wet on dry, to paint some darker areas on the beach using the Naples yellow mixed with the deep scarlet and the ultramarine. So you get a really sort of quite a neutral sort of brown colour. So it's quite nice to mix up these kind of three primaries, the yellow, the pink and the blue. So you can really experiment with that. I've just taken the excess paint off here and I'm just painting a little bit more dark in the centre of the sandy beach here. So it's quite a lovely neutral colour. mixing up a little bit more of the ultramarine and the deep scarlet here. Quite a creamy mixture, taking off the excess paint, adding even a little bit more, painting damp into damp. It really looks quite dark looking at it upside down there. And I'm just painting along the shore edge there, the seashore edge, using the tip of my size 10 brush, just adding these darks and details, damp into damp, really to sort of outline the edge of the seashore. But remember, I've got the wax resist there as well, resisting the paint, so I've got that lovely sort of surf coming into the shoreline as well. So these little bits of details I'm adding, I'm always looking at the photograph, especially when I'm working upside down. It really encourages me to keep looking, and the more you look, the more accurate your painting will become. So I'm using some Himalayan salt, you can use table salt, and I'm sprinkling it onto the damp beach, and I'm going to allow that to dry naturally. So while that's drying, I'm going to paint the cliff tops. So I'm using the Naples yellow with some of that ultramarine and deep scarlet mix. So it's just to kind of muddy up that Naples yellow. So I'm starting off with this lighter colour first, and I'm painting wet on dry with my size 10 brush and filling in the larger cliff there. And where there's a hard edge, I'm just using a clean damp brush just to soften it. So using the ultramarine with the deep scarlet here, quite creamy. You can add a bit of burnt sienna and ultramarine if you like. I'm painting damp into damp with my size 4 brush, just the markings and the ridges on the cliffs here, leaving lots of the lighter colour coming through as well. Remember, less is more. Adding a little bit more dark on the edge of the cliff, really to separate the cliff from the sky. It starts to make it look more 3D. While the painting is still damp, I've rinsed my brush, taken the excess water off, and I'm just softening some of those marks there just to push it back a little bit. And I'm going to allow my painting to dry naturally. I've mixed up lots of different greens using yellows, Prussian blue, burnt sienna, quinacridone gold and Viridian, varying the greens, and I'm wetting the paper. I'm going to paint this grassy area wet into wet. I'm using a large brush. And I'm actually using the corner of that brush to start with the lightest colours first of all, leaving gaps for the quinacridone gold. So going on with the yellow green, the quinacridone gold on its own, just looking where those warm sort of earthy yellow colours are. And again, working upside down, it really allows me to concentrate and look at the photograph, to look at the detail there. Using the Cerulean now with the yellow mix. It's a brighter green. It's a kind of a mid green, painting this wet into wet here and there. I thought I'd allow a little time to have some tilting as well, using the brush to kind of maneuver the paint as well. Adding a little bit of the Viridian now with the quinacridone gold. So just sort of using my size 10 round brush now to apply the paint, still sticking with those sort of light and medium yellows. I'm not going in with any darks yet. I am working light to dark. So I'm going to spatter some of the quinacridone gold. Be careful of your sky and the sea. So you may want to cover that with something, paper towel. I'm just tilting that, and it's really to get some random marks. I'm tilting that darker green now. That was the Prussian blue with the burnt sienna, and tilting that as well. I'm using my size 10 brush. So I'm using my brush now, my size 10 brush, painting damp into wet. So the paint is slightly thicker, but the surface is still quite wet. And I'm just painting the darks really in that bottom right hand corner. So I'm mixing up here the Viridian and the yellow, and I'm just sort of painting some smaller marks, pretty much now damp into damp. I'm using my Neef brush. I'll put a link for the brush in the description, but it's like a reservoir brush. You can use a rigger to apply this, or a small thin brush. and I'm using some Himalayan salt again and sprinkling it on to the damp surface. And I'm going to allow that to dry naturally. I'm also going to use some brush show using olive green brush show, but you could use black or brown or grey. Any sort of darkish colour will be a good substitute. And I'm just sprinkling this into the foreground area onto that damp paint. If you don't have brush show, don't worry. You could always spatter wet on dry later. So I've allowed my painting to dry off a little bit so it's damp. It's not wet, and I'm just using a plastic store card cut up and lifting off the paint to get some thinner, lighter grasses. You can see there I've protected the painting with paper towel, the sky and the sea, and I'm spattering some of that dark green, the Prussian blue and the burnt sienna wet on dry, and then spattering some of the yellow wet on dry as well to create the look of wildflowers and lots of yummy textures. So I've added some white into that yellow and it lightens up the yellow, and I'm just spattering that here and there using my size 4 round brush wet on dry. You don't have to do as much spattering as this or any at all, and any spots that you don't like you can lift off after. So I'm going to turn my painting around. It's the first time I've seen it, so I'm quite excited just to have a look at it, to assess it, to see if I need to do any more. And I find removing the tape helps me to do this. But it's also seeing it the right way up for the first time. And you can just sort of make a few changes. And of course I couldn't resist a few more spatters, so I'm using the paper towel to protect the painting and making some smaller spatters just at the edge of the grass area to separate that sort of grassy area from the rest of the painting. Now this area here where I didn't actually get the sky right down to the horizon, I'm just softening it with a little synthetic brush, my Eradicator brush. And I also use a stencil brush to do this. It's like a hog hair brush, just to soften that. I can't completely get rid of it, but it just blends it into the horizon. And I lifted off the excess paint with a paper towel, and I'm just softening some of the darker colours here to make them paler so they look further away. And I felt I needed some sort of movement and life in the painting, so I'm just painting some small birds using the ultramarine and the deep scarlet mix there, a little bit watered down, wet on dry with my size 4 brush, a small, medium and large bird in a kind of wide V shape. I'm just adding a little bit of the Naples yellow just to the horizon area there. I felt it was a little bit too pale. And I'm also adding a sort of pale mix of the ultramarine and deep scarlet, just a light tonal value to finish off my painting. And here is the finished painting. I really hope you enjoyed the experience of watching me paint upside down, and I hope you're inspired to do the same and to see what happens. And please let me know in the comments section below. If you have any questions about this tutorial, please put those in the comments section. And if you'd like to get access to my exclusive weekly tutorials that are available on my Patreon membership, details about that can be found in the description below. But it really helps me to support the tutorials that I produce here on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Happy upside down painting. Bye for now.